Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, everybody. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whoever you're doing it with, however good it feels, however many times you're going to do it. I don't care. I'm just glad you're doing it right here with me on a little old channel, Legal Vices. Today is, once again, what we try to do every week unless there's some other important and pressing topics to discuss. Maritime Monday. We are here. We're going to be bringing up my very, very, very super special guest here in just a couple of minutes, but let's get our housekeeping stuff done and out of the way here first. Let's see. We will be talking more about the Baltimore Bridge. We'll do the update on that next week. They're just kind of in a very, very small nutshell. They've got a couple of channels, very narrow, very shallow channels cleared. They're working to clear the bridge off the ship. They're going to try to refloat the vessel so they don't have to drag it across the gas line that's supposedly right underneath it. And they're hopefully by the end of this month, they'll have a wider, deeper passage open. But we'll talk more about that next week. Today, we're talking submarines. And again, this has been something that's been on the burner, as most of you know who follow the show regularly, for about the past year. We're just getting us up and running here. We've already got comments. How many people do we got here so far? We've got 165 people popping in. That's good. 88 likes. So half of you haven't done your job. Hit the like button, get down there and smash the like button, hit the subscribe button, and then take our like and subscribe poll. And everybody here watching on the replay crew, feel free to hit the like button as well. You're still important. Today's like and subscribe poll is pretty simple. The like and subscribe and vote poll is: what is the scariest thing about a submarine accident? Darkness, suffocation, drowning, or Jeff having smart enough friends to talk about things like this. Those are your choices. It's just a silly little poll to remind you to hit the like and subscribe button. And today, I expect a lot of chat. It's going to be chat intensive with me and my guest. I'll be trying to pay as much attention to regular chat, your guys' chat, as possible. If there's some questions that are interesting and pertinent and whatnot, and if I happen to see them, I'll bring them up. But if there is something you absolutely want to have addressed, want to have asked, please, super chat's the best way to do it. Not required, not begged for, not solicited, but graciously and gratefully accepted. But it does guarantee that you'll get it read and addressed as the show goes along, because it comes up in nice big bright colors, and it's easy to see, and it automatically stars itself. So that's the quickest and most effective and surefire way of getting a question asked. But also be aware that some of your questions might be things that aren't able to be talked about. If not, please understand. But I expect you won't be asking for too much information or too much of the I don't know, I guess classified or off limits discussions, but we'll talk about that later. Without further ado, let me clear off what we got going here. Shelby Fogg with the first super chat, and then all the way from Australia. Thank you so much. My mom was a submariner and terrified of the ocean. Oh, that's interesting. I guess that's kind of like a pilot that's afraid of heights. I'm afraid of heights, but if I'm enclosed, it doesn't bother me. It's just like, when you're on a Boy Scout trip and people are like, wow, look here, come over here and look over the edge of the cliff. I'm like, nah, I'm good really far back there. I don't mind if I'm enclosed. But Little Dog Chaz has been a member for 13 months. Thank you so much. Congratulations on 75,000 subscribers, Jeff. Oh, thank you very, very much. We're currently at 75,125, I believe. And now we're going to bring up our guest right as soon as we finish reading this super chat from Jason J. Thank you so much for the $5. Appreciate that, brother. I'll be lurking. 6-yard dumpster just arrived, and Dad has to do Dad's version of spring cleaning. All right, well, enjoy your morning doing that and listening to what we've got to say. We're not too video intensive today, so you should be able to follow along just fine with us on in the background. And without further ado, again, let's bring up my super special guest, one of my best friends on planet Earth, a guy that I've just come to know and grown to love. It's retired Commander Josh Chism. What's up, Commander? Can I call you Josh?
Yeah, you can call me Josh. I don't think you've ever called me Commander.
I have not. And of course, if you watched last week's, you saw that I called you Lieutenant Commander.
That's all right. We've all suffered demotions in our careers.
apologize for that.
Indignity was minor. Indignity was minor, so I'll live with it.
Yes, man. So this again, people have been getting hyped because we first talked about this, and Chad, he's one of the 4 people on Earth that know that I do this. I know we've talked about who knows what's going on. Has my family figured this out yet? No. Josh is one of the 4 people on Earth that I've actually told that I do this, and this was right after the Titan implosion that happened about a year ago.
Yeah. I've been behind the curtain there in the studio,
and you had to wait for your retirement and then wait for you to get settled into your new job.
Yeah, that's true. And your topic's really amazing. So Maritime Monday, was thinking about this. Like, there's so much timely stuff going. I think you're not suffering for lack of content, and people's curiosity really is super kind of impressive to see that this is an area that folks want to know more about. So
it is. It's just fascinating. And we're going to be talking more than just about submarines, because Josh does some amazingly cool stuff. He's a top-notch, world-class sailor, sailboat sailor, and we're going to be talking about some of that a little bit later. We've got quite a few. You were asking what sort of people watch here. We got everybody from box wine moms to all branches of the military, to Coast Guard, to merchant marine people, to just everybody. Everybody, for some reason, it started out on an accident. I had nothing to talk about one Monday, so I go, what the hell am I going to talk about? So I just searched YouTube for ship collisions, and okay, I can just review ship collision videos and talk about those, and everybody loved it. So we just decided it's like, I absolutely didn't think anybody would have any interest in this topic, but it's become quite a thing. And we haven't talked about. Go ahead.
This whole community out there, G Captain as well. So there's people that are actually paying attention to this stuff. So,
well, now with the Baltimore Bridge thing, it's drawn a lot of attention to sites like this, and what's going on with shipping, and some of the other naval and maritime related channels. They're actually becoming a thing now, as we're all hyper aware about accidents. But let's first of all, let me tell you guys, how Josh and I met. You came here to Korea, was it January of 2020?
Yeah.
2019, the first time, 2020.
Immediately pre-pandemic, I was in Busan for work. Yeah.
But we had known each other through Instagram like a year before that?
I think easily a year. So through the cigar community in Korea was how we met, but indirectly, because I was up in Seoul at the embassy for a few years. That was how what first brought me to the country. And then I think it was either through Dan Gedacht or somebody in that circle connected over Instagram. And then Mike, proprietor and great friend of Casabano there in Busan, put together the cigar cruises. So I was planning to come down for one of those, I think, somewhere around like 2017, 2018. And then you just were like continually in my feed, suggesting connection. I'm like, who is this guy? And then, I think before I came out in 2020, I was like, well, I know this dude through Instagram. He seems to be all around in the local area. So why don't I just connect and see what's going on? And a very close friend of mine who's actually should be watching the show this morning. He's all about cigar diplomacy. And so that kind of started as a little kind of inside joke between us while I was at the embassy. And then, he kind of said the same thing. He's like, dude, cigar diplomacy, that's how you meet people. It spreads out, social networks expand, and you meet new and amazing and interesting people like yourself.
Yeah. And then that was just kind of the weird thing. We knew each other from Instagram for at least a year or two before. And then as life would have it, you move 1.5 miles away from my house.
Yep.
And we got up to some stuff during the few years you were here. We had some adventures.
Yeah, it was fun. It was definitely fun. Camping, traveling around South Korea. It was pretty different parts of South Korea too. So I think I certainly benefited from your experience and knowledge there. So it's very helpful.
Now, also, I named the channel Legal Vices because obviously we talk about legal things, then we talk about vices, the legal vices only, because that's what we do. But Josh is responsible for 2 of my vices that I now have. He's responsible for wine because I was always the whiskey guy. I was never really big into wine until Josh came along and ruined my budget further. So, as a matter of fact, we have a lovely Italian Amaranta here tonight.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Lovely. That's a fantastic wine. And what's on your wrist, Josh?
I knew you were going to do a wristwatch check. So today, so the Sangin Neptune.
Oh, nice.
So these guys, I think, did I tell you about them? So they get a nice plug and shout out in the show. Former Marine Raiders, so Marine Special Forces.
Oh yeah, you told me go get one of their watches and it was sold out in like 5 seconds.
Yeah, they're always oversubscribed or tend to be, but Sangin Instruments named for a place in Afghanistan that a lot of these the founders, both of the co-founders, served. So they just created these sort of tool watches or instruments, and so super rugged, really nice, kind of utilitarian type form factor, and really love it. And I've had it on this like silicone strap. You can change out all the straps, and it's I haven't really, you just don't think about it, which is kind of one of those things when you have a wristwatch or timepiece, like if it's unimposing, it does what it needs to do. It's mechanical, kind of analog, love that. And so that's what's been in the rotation of late.
So if you haven't figured it out by now, Josh is single-handedly responsible for crushing my budget and getting me interested in watches. I had purchased probably 3 watches in my entire life until Josh moved into town. I thought my $500 Citizen was the most ridiculous expenditure I'd ever made in my life for a timepiece. Oh, for those days to come back again.
So laying the blame at my feet, I see. Thanks.
It's 100% at your feet. I used to laugh at you in your silly watches there for a minute until I didn't, and then it sort of became a thing. So yeah, it's Josh's fault that I'm into watches.
Yeah,
he got me.
Well,
it's 100% his fault.
It's I guess on the positive side of that, I'll take credit for ruining your budget, but just the connectivity that comes with it opens up new communities. It's super interesting. Yeah. I'm sure you've had people come up or say comment on a timepiece, and it's just a conversation starter, or shared enthusiasm. It's just amazing.
Well, see, I mean, that's kind of the thing, like with the wine community, the watch community, the cigar community, whiskey community, and even this YouTube, it kind of does that. It brings probably into your sphere that you normally wouldn't have.
Yeah, totally.
We would never have a chance to meet each other ever. Probably never have an interest in meeting each other if it hadn't been for cigars and whiskey, and eventually wine and watches.
And maritime collisions and disasters.
So what as I said, Josh is one of my best friends on planet Earth, and it's super awesome to have him here. Let's read a couple of these. I don't want to get too far behind on these chats and things in case things go awry and we get too involved to pay attention.
Can always go off the rails. Yeah.
Yeah. Which it usually does with me. But Cora Savage, thank you so much for $20. Oh my God. Thanks. Just remembered my ancestor was a privateer captain. His first ship sunk because of weather. The second time his crew mutinied and he was marooned. He was rescued, quit, went west, one step ahead of the noose. So he became a rancher instead. What? That's an adventure. You need to write a book, write about these things. That sounds like a fascinating story.
Yeah, it could be an episode of Yellowstone, the prequel series or something.
Oh man, I just binged all 3 of the Yellowstone series, and oh my God, it's the first time in 54 years and 35 years in Korea that I got seriously homesick.
Yeah, that's right. I think the way they did the filming, Taylor Sheridan, I mean, it's just an amazing show. All 3, the 2 prequels, I guess, 1882 and 1923, which I think it seems like there's going to be a subsequent, like season 2 of 1923. The casting, everything, it's just really well shot, well done. And the
writing is excellent. The first 3 seasons of Yellowstone were filmed in northern Utah. And
I didn't know that.
A couple of the scenes were actually filmed in Logan. I saw one screen and oh my God, that's the mountain range that I literally looked at every day of my life for 19 years. And the bar in the first couple of seasons, like where the big city developer guy Beth took him there, and he got his ass kicked in the bar. That bar's in Ogden, and I've been in that bar far too many times. And so it was really homesick, and just the vistas and things. But Island says she's most afraid of cannibals. Duh.
I knew that was going to come up based on your pre-coaching cannibalism.
Now,
not a subject area I'm qualified to comment on, thankfully.
Well, the next question you are eminently qualified to answer, and it's one that I sort of wonder as well. Buddha Berries from Australia says, important question, is it Submariner or Submariner?
Yes. So Submariner would be the pronunciation. A Submariner would be a substandard mariner. It seems to be the for as long as I can remember, that was one of the first pronunciation corrections I received, is the emphasis on the submarine part of the word, so submariner rather than submariner, which is sort of more emphasizing the subpar elements of somebody's maritime skills. Yeah,
well, that makes a ridiculous amount of sense, because I'd heard it pronounced both ways, but I consistently started to notice that people that are actually on submarines pronounced it submariner, and I thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah,
because that's not how I would pronounce it, and clearly hadn't for most of my life.
Nor was it how I pronounced it until I became a submariner. Yeah.
And Mr. K says, see, Josh, agree. There's too much to cover. We need more maritime nights. How about Wednesdays?
Driving content for you, man. There you go.
Well, see, we need to keep Josh entertained so that he'll come back at some point. See, this is the great thing about having a retired career military friend. When I can say, hey, I start my show at 6:00 a.m. your time. He's like, yeah, no problem. Just let me whip up a cup of coffee. I'll be waiting.
I don't know that it was no for you. Anything's no problem, but 6 a.m. is definitely a challenge these days. It's kind of nice to be able to drive your schedule a little bit more, have more autonomy over it.
And we'll talk about that real quick here. Kevin Dorr, public perception is the Navy is not up to par with all the collisions DEI over recent years, and if you see current pics of Navy ships, they are rusty.
Is he
comment?
Talking about the Russian Navy or the U.S. Navy? Hard to tell here. And I would love to see the
response.
I think generally, if you look at the survey data, and not to be contradictory here, but the survey data shows that, as far as public institutions go, the military more generally still enjoys pretty high favorability ratings, and the Navy specifically. So maybe there are certain corners of naysayers, but I think like any organization that's involved in high risk activities, there's problems that happen, and so it's less so in the accidents that may happen inevitably, but the response to them and, how that's publicly communicated. And I think my appraisal is, for the most part, the Navy's doing, acquitting itself pretty well in that regard.
Well, Mr. K says, another enthusiastic watcher, it's more common than I thought. Have you guys met Adam 22? No, I have not met Adam 22. Thanks. Thanks for that, Mr. K. Rare in history, member for 19 months. Dang, it's getting a long time, brother. How's it going? Any of Jeff's friends is a friend of ours. Thanks for sharing your experience.
Nice. Yeah, I love the dog photos. I've been seeing a couple of those pop up.
Yeah, they got the dogs there, and we've got the pig dogs over here. The emotional support potatoes are sitting here. So Josh is used to hearing them snore, so he won't be disturbed by the snoring dogs. And Ooh La La Pat says, what is better than a holiday watching Maritime Monday while on a holiday? Howdy from Paris, the one in France. Thank you very much for the continued support, as always. And Jem said spending money on wine and watches is better than meth. Yes, okay, I'll give you that. And at least I have something to show for it. Well, let's start at the very beginning. When did you join the Navy?
Oh boy, yeah, Book of Genesis stuff.
Yeah.
So I guess I could go through a little bit of what brought me to the Navy and kind of how I came through. So college. So I did a program called Reserve Officer Training Corps, which is one of the 3 pathways in the U.S. to get commissioned as an officer. So coming out of high school, they set you up, pay for your college. You get military basic Navy training. So imagine your boot camp type training, and then throughout your 4 years, you kind of go through some academics and sort of more military professional development. So as I was leaving school in 2002, closing in on, actually commissioning as an officer in the Navy, you select, hey, which part of the service do you want to go into? So most of us typically become what's called line officers, which would be like warfare, principal warfare disciplines. So imagine naval aviators, pilots, surface warfare officers, or SWOs. So they drive the destroyers and cruisers, surface warships, and then submariners, and then SEALs. So the Naval Special Forces or Naval Special Warfare, which is a much smaller community, would be the warfare side of the house. As it turns out, as a kid growing up, The Hunt for Red October came out as a movie. Most people are inspired to join the Navy by Top Gun around, those of us who are kind of in our, 40s, and that was the era, and that certainly was a movie that had a lot of impact on me.
Oh my God! I told you that's when I was in high school was when Top Gun came out. I know I told you this. They had all the Army come in doing all their little video things. They had the Marines come in. They're wearing their dress blues. The Navy drove up a semi truck with the side flipped up in the parking lot. They parked at the far end of the parking lot. The side rolls up. This movie screen folds out, and they just start showing Top Gun in the parking lot of the high school. That was their recruiting.
Yeah. So Jerry Bruckheimer and Michael Bay, the Navy owes them a debt of gratitude for the generation or a generation and a half of people that it attracted to the service, for sure. So there's a kind of that era or heyday of kind of Cold War winding down, but growing interest, and had read some Tom Clancy books, and then in the late 90s, this book came out by Christopher Drew and Sherry Sontag. Chris Drew is a staff writer for the New York Times, and he'll come up later in our story, in our conversation here. So just remember that. But they wrote a book called Blind Man's Bluff that kind of detailed some of the Cold War exploits of U.S. submarines. I can't personally comment at this point on the veracity of any of the stories in there, but it is just imagining this as a fictitious tale was really kind of neat to me. I was like, wow, is this the type of stuff that submarines might do? So this is kind of interesting. So I was going through my, highly recommended to read if you want some entertaining, possible fiction, fantastic stories. The both of them are great storytellers. But it's like, oh, this is kind of cool. So going through as a closing in on graduation, and then you go through a process of selection of where in the Navy you want to go. It's like, oh, this submarine thing might be cool. Between my second to last and last year of university, went out on a submarine as part of my summer training, and then got to know some of the people there. I was like, these people seem really smart and interesting. The job seems pretty hard based on what they're telling me on the sidelines of this, but in a good way. It's rewarding, and it's just a unique small crew, only about 120 people on each submarine. And I didn't want to be kind of lost in the sauce in a really large crewed ship. I didn't have the eyesight to go fly, so it was that was kind of off the table. So I said, this seems like it'd be really neat. So I went through the process of selection, where you go through a series of technical interviews, and then interview with the 4-star admiral, the head of naval reactors, who's the person who's in charge of the entirety of the Navy's nuclear fleet, both aircraft carriers and submarines. Got selected, and then went down to do my training, which is about 15 months. We can talk more about that process, but it's relatively long, probably the longest training pipeline other than aviation in the Navy. And so it was quite a transformational experience, life-changing in many ways. So
what are some of the qualifications you need to be selected to be a submariner? What sort of psychological training and testing and physical and intellectual and educational stuff does the testing involve?
So at time of selection, we call it service selection. So the Naval Academy does this selection night, and then for ROTC, you'll do it a little bit differently, but in any case, the process nets out the same. I was a non-technical major, so I was not an engineering major in college, but even so, you still have to take 2 semesters of calculus-based physics, take 2 semesters of calculus. So you have some technical academic work on which the screening panel can make a decision before inviting you to an interview. So they do a paper screen. They also look at your performance as a cadet or a midshipman to see, how did you do in sort of your Navy specific professional development, as far as leadership and sort of knowledge of Navy customs and traditions, those sorts of things. But the focus is definitely on your academic performance overall, and then within those technical disciplines. Then you go to Naval Reactors headquarters in Washington, D.C., and you do a series of technical interviews. So I interviewed with two pretty senior Navy commanders, and there's left and right limits if you're not an engineering major to what they can ask, kind of within what you've studied. So I think I had to derive Newton's gravitational constant. Yep, I had to prove that.
Count me out.
And then the other question, I can't believe I remember this, by the way. The other was, I think I had to, essentially do the calculus to derive the volume of a cone. So they seemed pretty satisfied with my answers. And then you go, and this is a very famous process. And so if you talk to any former submariners, and so we could talk about, if you're talking about nuclear submarines in the Navy, you can't omit Admiral Hyman Rickover, the father of the nuclear Navy, just a central figure to this day. 70 years of nuclear submarining since USS Nautilus, and sort of the imprint that he as an individual had on the program. Longest served naval officer in U.S. Navy history, one of the longest served, if not the longest served officer in U.S. military history, from pre-World War II until he was unfortunately, in some ways, forced to retire by Secretary of the Navy John Lehman in the 80s during the Reagan administration. We could talk about that too, but Rickover, fascinating individual. He instituted the process of personally interviewing every officer who ever would serve on a U.S. nuclear powered warship. And so I interviewed with the 4-star at the time, Admiral Skip Bowman. And you're kind of coached a little bit before you go into the room. And so the commanders, who these are submariners who serve in a place called the Naval Reactors Line Locker, they sort of doesn't really coach you up. They're like, hey, this is what you need to say. But when you walk in, like, tell them, like, as you hit the door, you have like 30 seconds. And this 4-star admiral, he's got limited time. You have 30 seconds from the door to the chair. You need to start talking from the time you enter the room until you sit down. And these are things like, hey, state your name, like where you're from, what school you go to, what's your major, it's sort of like getting the sort of technical details out of the way. Obviously, the admiral's, kind of witting to all this information. And then as I remember it, the question I got to ask is like, hey, you can't ignore the elephant in the room. And that is, you're an international relations major. So you're going to have to work pretty hard to actually succeed. It was like, yes, sir. It was not, I think, as emotionally scarring of an experience that some had previously had. So Skip Bowman was, I think, 3 or 4 admirals after Rickover had been the head of the nuclear Navy. So there's famous stories of the infamous chair with one leg shorter than the others, so that the candidates who were interviewing with Admiral Rickover would slide out of the chair. There's a rather famous story of one candidate who was, the admiral didn't very much like his responses. So he's, asked to stay in a broom closet for a period of time, a couple hours, and then come back out and answer questions. The truth of these stories is, I think that some of it is more legendary than it is actual truth.
Still scare the crap out of you going into it.
Right. And so I think that, but, to his credit, the pedigree of the people that were selected for the program, especially at the outset, and sort of the emphasis on foundational qualities was, that has not gone away. And so it's really interesting to see how that culture has permeated the program. And anyways, we talk more about that.
Bush McFadden wants to know how you did on the Kobayashi Maru.
Yes. Okay, some Star Trek references here. Yeah.
And I'm assuming this is one of your people, 4 knots to nowhere, says, and this is why I didn't want to be an O-ganger. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, an officer. Yeah. Well, the enlisted nukes, though they don't interview with Admiral Rickover personally, they are still going through the same training pipeline as the officers. So they suffer to a similar degree as us. It's not, I'd say that jokingly, it's not really suffering, but it's challenging.
But Alan Walsh from Scotland says retired. I was expecting an old gray dude. He looks about 30.
A
George
little
is
bit
aging
older than
very
that.
well.
Yeah. Yes.
But we also do have a JKD Buck says Connery tried to warn Alec Baldwin about how things don't react well with bullets.
True statement. Lovely. I love the avatars here. I think I saw Jonathan Frakes on the Star Trek question. Now we got Gordon Ramsay here.
And John Doe says Sean Connery to Alec Baldwin. Some of the directors of photography here don't react well to bullets. Oh no!
Oh, wow. That's like a multi-tiered reference there. Yeah,
it is. And Stingy for 17 months says nothing to add here. Just wanted to burn my membership chat and say thanks for 17 months for the fun of harassing you, Flux and Ozzy, two other streamers. Flux is here. She's retired Army. Tracy Fagan says I can't even be on an airplane for long. I can't imagine being in a sub. Well, I guess that's a good segue. So how old were you when you actually signed on the dotted line and said, I am now a member of the United States Navy?
So I was 18. So before starting college, doing all the training, taking the money, as it were. And then as you converge on your actual commissioning date, you sign some more paperwork just to, validate. Well, you could also like fail out of school and then either need to pay the Navy back for what they did. But I actually was commissioned when I was 22.
Okay, and was when your first posting was on the San Francisco?
Yeah, so that was my first time.
Wow.
So all the training, the training took about a year and a half, a little bit less. So it was November of 2003 when I got to my first submarine. So it's been 21 years.
And what's the I assume what was your rank at that point in time, and where does that fit? Because the Navy does everything differently than everything.
Yes. Yeah, the maritime services are unique. Yeah. So I was an ensign, so that's like the lowest of low.
It's the Wesley
ranks.
Crusher of the Navy.
Absolutely. I was a red shirt. Yeah. Well, I guess the red shirts were, you could be an ensign and be a yellow shirt working for Geordie LaForge, which actually be probably more technically correct if you're talking about nuclear Navy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's going through your mind, I guess, if you can remember back that far, when they said, okay, you are now a submariner and we are going to put you on this submarine?
Yeah. If you can remember back that far. Good question. So I think it's less about what's going through your mind. I mean, of course, like anything, you're going to be a little bit trepidatious, for new endeavor. And so the training prepares you, let's say, in both the academic and an operational sense to be ready to do your first job in the Navy. But there's social dynamics that you're not necessarily, like, no amount of training prepares you for that. It's just kind of a little bit of self-selection, like, hey, this is an all-volunteer community within the Navy. So people that go there generally wish to be there. There are some cases of non-volunteer folks being sent, but it's kind of edge cases, not really the standard. And it's more scary in the sense that the pressure to perform is there. I mean, I think it may vary individual to individual, but nobody joins this profession, with the intention of screwing things up. They want to do well. They want to have an impact. They want to be positive contributors. So I think for me, it was more a case of, as I was getting closer to going to the sub, I had started hearing some stories like, hey, this boat might be a little bit troubled. The talent spread across the submarine force writ large, or submarine to submarine, there's variance, right? And so some folks that were kind of, along the pathway there as I was going to this sub and knew of the sub were like, hey, it's probably not going to be like super easy time, just letting you know. I'm like, okay, well, whatever. I'm just going to keep an open mind about things. So in that sense, I wasn't really like thinking too much. I was like, all right, I'm ready to do. Like, I've been through all this training, let's go do. And so you can start to get a little bit, anxious to get out there and practice what, you've been kind of academically studying for so long.
And so this was 2003, 2004?
That's right. Yes. So I showed up late 03. And then, early 04 was really kind of like getting rolling into my job and learning about being a submariner.
So it was already a fairly old submarine, I guess, as far as they go. 75, 79 it was launched.
Oh, yeah.
commissioned in 81.
Both, well, all three submarines that I served on throughout my career were the same age as me. I was the age of the boat when I got them, more or less. I mean, you can count it like when was the keel laid down, because obviously these submarines are highly complex.
77.
Yeah. So yeah, from the keel laid to when the boat was complete, it takes a number of years. It's not like wave a magic wand and we crank out submarines like sausages. So yeah, these are quite old, but highly reliable pieces of technology in many ways. And so yeah, we could talk more on that stuff too, just depending on the questions.
Yeah, I mean, that was the interesting thing. I know I told you, but when former consul. Oh, and by the way, this is just a thing between me and Josh here. Carlos has just been named the ambassador to Panama. He's moving up to Seoul in June.
Oh, congrats! Send him my congrats. Good for him. Yeah.
I got a friend. He's the Panamanian consul down in Busan, but he's got tagged to be the ambassador. So he'll be moving up.
He'll be racking up. Yeah, he's already been in Busan for almost 5 years, I think.
Yeah. But I think when we think of submarines, I tend to think they're fairly small objects. But looking at the San Francisco, again, it's probably not even close to being the largest now. But it was at 100. Where's this? I got the stat sheet here. 100 meters, 110 meters. That's 360 feet ish.
361 feet to be precise. Yeah.
That's a long piece of equipment.
Yes, it is.
It's so,
field. Yeah.
But And what's the crew on it? How many?
So typically, I think average might be about 120. You can augment and take more, but it's not necessarily a limitation in the sense that the size constrains the crew. It's the tasks that need to be done on board the submarine that define the crew size, and that's how they ultimately make the accommodations. But 120 is fairly typical.
Well, see, that was the interesting thing. I was thinking, it's 110 meters long, and there's 120 people on there. So that's basically, one person per meter you've got in length, but it's not a wide boat.
No,
it's 10 meters wide.
32 feet. Yeah.
And that's with all of the equipment. So what's size-wise, what's it like living in that compact of a space?
So the way I would describe it to folks, just the Los Angeles class submarines were what I served on, 3 different LA class boats, which is sort of the mainstay of the U.S. attack submarine fleet, so the SSNs. About 2/3 engine room, 1/3 for the remaining space for crew accommodations, the weapons, tactical systems like sonar, the control room where you do navigation, the ship's periscopes or sensing systems are located, and then galley, berthing areas. All of that is the forward 1/3 portion. So it's a big, they imagine nuclear gas tank and engine, for lack of a more artful way of describing it. And so that 1/3 is probably roughly equivalent to like 3 sizable RVs or caravans. So it's tight in the sense that like there is little in the way of personal space. Everybody, when you're actually kind of out deployed and your full complement of crew, usually will like set up temporary racks or berthing in the torpedo room. So you'll have some personnel, some amount that are sleeping in between the weapons. And then you have everybody up to a certain rank, like E6 or first class petty officer in the Navy would be hot racking. So that's 3 people share 2 bunks or 2 racks. And so the actual like space to like store your personal gear and something, I'm sure you can look this stuff up. There's myriad videos from that are out there floating around showing this, but underneath the rack pan is where you can store your clothing.
Wow. Up in Connecticut, it says 18 inches by 6 foot bunk space.
Yeah, up in Connecticut, I imagine it's probably in Groton, the home of our submarine force. But yeah, that's accurate. Totally. It's
oh my God. How do you sleep in 18 inches? Well,
Yeah, it's yeah. Yeah. Don't sit up suddenly. Yeah, don't sit up suddenly. So yeah, that area is pretty small. And officers have it a little bit more luxurious accommodation. So where I was, 3 hot racking 101 submarine life, totally.
Risky business. Please get off the thermonuclear device.
Right. Yeah.
Smells.
Right, yeah.
I don't imagine it would smell very fresh in there after a long deployment underwater, or is everything really well cleaned air-wise?
So this is a really interesting topic. So thinking about things, so like your senses and being a window into things being amiss. So you're used to the norm, and then things are out of the norm. So when you're on the sub, certain spaces might have more like smell of lubricating oil or certain other whether you're cooking in the galley, right? So
Yeah.
but the atmospheric control equipment on the submarine generally is taking care of a lot of that. The other kind of element is when you leave the submarine. Yeah, boat smell. So when you leave the submarine, so
No Taco Tuesdays.
Yeah, that's true too. When you leave the boat, the one of the principal pieces of atmospheric control equipment, CO2 scrubber, so removes carbon dioxide from the air. Obviously, when we breathe, that's what we put out. It uses a chemical called amine to help with that process chemically. Well, when you leave the boat, your clothing is almost permanently infused with the smell of boat. And so whoever that was, a common boat smell. It is very unique smell.
When my mother was alive and I would go back home on vacation, the first thing she would do is like make me wash my clothes because they smelled like Korea, that kind of same thing. It's like your clothes smell like Korea, go wash.
Right, yeah. Except we don't have the convenient little stools at the barbecue place that you can put your clothing into, to kind of mitigate that. So I pulled out clothing recently, and it's been more than a decade since I was on the boat. I have gear that still smells like the boat.
Did cigar smoke cover or enhance boat smell? I would imagine it's a no smoking environment.
Funny story about that. Yeah, actually, this is very timely. So when I came in the Navy, you could smoke. So my first submarine assignment as a junior officer. When I came back as a department head, 2009, we made the decision to go smoke free. So there's there depends on the class of sub, but on where the submarines that I served on, only one area on the boat could you go smoke, the smoke pit, which is kind of all the way aft in the engine room, the lowest level of the engine room. And it's people commonly ask this, like, well, what about the atmosphere? Well, the smoke pit was underneath ventilation ducting, and so the atmospheric control equipment on the boat, just like it would handle like off-gassing stuff from cooking in the galley, we have atmospheric control gear that would handle cigarette smoke or cigar smoke too.
It seems like, I mean, as much as I love cigar smoke, it seems like that would be something you wouldn't want on a submarine. It would sort of seem to permeate stuff.
Well, there's another fine tradition is when the submarine's on the surface up on the bridge, the bridge is the top of the sail, so the fin of the submarine for the uninitiated. Generally, so you'll have the officer of the deck up there, so the person who's in charge of the safe navigation of the ship. Imagine, I think in kind of, you would call it in civil mariner parlance, the duty captain or the officer of the watch, the officer of the deck. So typically a junior officer, one of the department heads, a lookout, and then sometimes a second person up there for additional lookout duties or force protection. So there's 2 or 3 people up there when you're transiting on the surface, say on the open ocean. First time you come up, right, you surface, crack the hatch, go up there, man the bridge. Very fine tradition of smoking a cigar up there atop the bridge, and numerous of seeing cruising submariner friends, Facebooks and stuff, and seeing is sort of the classic photo of them on the bridge with a cigar with the captain. It's definitely part of the culture, I would say.
Well, Default Anonymous says, I know nothing about the Navy, but absolutely love Battlestar Galactica. Is it pretty much the same hunting down those Russian Cylons?
No comment on the nationality of the Cylons, but there are more than a few parallels. I think the writers of the show probably took a lot of their inspiration from nautical or Navy or maritime themes.
How tall is the sub? We know that the beam is 10 meters, but what about the height are we looking at? And then the height of the corridors and things.
Oh, right. Yeah. So if you're like interior to the sub, yeah. So certain areas might have more headroom, and obviously depends on the class of the submarine. But, I'm 5'9", so 175 in metric terms. Never hit my head on anything. Going through certain hatches, you have to duck. But generally walking around the corridors, no issue. I had a good friend who's 6'4", so that might be something around 185 centimeters. He was a little bit cramped in the racks or the bunks, and then certain areas he'd have to duck or mind his head. So you just got to be mindful of your surroundings. But for the most part, totally fine.
Oh, and I hesitate to ask questions that people tell me to ask. Ask about the knocking myth. I shoot ropes.
I've never heard of this.
Oh, good. That's probably something I don't want to know about. But he also said submarine humidor check. No, at the cigar lounge here in Busan, the people that bring the most and best cigars to trade and share are Navy, far and away. The Army are kind of some stingy assholes, but the Navy they bring tons of cigars into the lounge, because I guess it's probably because they can't smoke them on the ships and in where they are, and then you're out at sea for 6-8 months at a time, I guess. But
yeah.
What tattoo did you get during your time in the Navy?
Oh, yeah, no tattoos. I am tattoo free.
Rebel.
Which might make me. It makes me the contrarian in the group, huh?
And Spot 79 says my wife wouldn't even let me bring my sea bag back into the house for a month.
Yeah, encountered more than a few of those situations of wash your clothes outside the house.
We need to get that trending #boat smell.
Totally.
Trend. J.K. Buck, where would you hide a T-Rex on a submarine? In the small arms locker. Thanks. That was good. I guess. But well, let's fast forward to the main event.
Yeah. Okay.
How do you want to do? Do you want to? Because I have the 60 minutes video that you gave to me a million years ago.
We have it. Okay.
We want to watch that, but do you want to talk about it first and then watch this, or sort of go through and talk about it as we watch? What's your preference?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I guess I could just paint a picture leading up to the underway. So the voyage from Guam, which is our home station. And then you can maybe roll into the video, and then I can
we'll just pause the hell out of it while we go through.
So I got there at the end of 2003. We had to sort of immediately leave Guam and come back to the mainland US, to San Diego, actually, to undergo about 6 months of repairs, sort of out of cycle, to get the submarine mission ready. So we came back, and every submarine, all the submarines in the US Navy, go through a series of inspections to validate their readiness to actually deploy and do their peacetime and wartime missions. And so it's a pretty rigorous process. And so there's sort of a tactical and a engineering or nuclear flavors of inspections. And so we had departed Guam and had to undergo a couple of these. We did fairly well on the tactical side, and somewhat underperformed, I would say, on the engineering side of the house. And so that draws a lot of scrutiny from outside, not necessarily in a negative way, just to apply resources to help us get well, as it were. But like any sort of high performing organization, and submarines in the nuclear Navy should be thought of as high reliability organizations. So the consequences of failure are extreme. And so as a consequence, the controls and systems in place to have effective oversight of maintenance and everything else are pretty rigorous. So we had gone through these inspections, go back to this major shipyard period, really kind of instituted a get well program. We had a new commanding officer, Kevin, very close friend of mine. Kevin Mooney is, you'll see him on the 60 Minutes program. Very much a lifelong friend of mine, and a huge influence on me as a young junior officer. He showed up to the boat same time I did. And so he really brought this idea of culture of excellence. I think really was pushing the crew to really take a hard focus on the areas that we needed to improve. And so in the span of 6 months, going through a very difficult shipyard period, repairs, coming back, going back to sea, getting ready, and then knowing we had the inspections on the back side of this, we had really markedly improved our performance as a crew and as a ship.
So you had been there for about 6 months. Then you went into 6 months of, I guess, essentially dry docking, and then you went back out after about a year total.
I'd been on board a month, and then we had to go back to a dry dock. Yeah. Right. So generally not the most fun period. You want to be out and as a submarine officer tactically employing the ship. So
what's the average deployment time on a submarine?
Typically, I would say 6 months is fairly average. These days, they might trend longer. Now, you're not like underwater for 6 months, but my last deployment as a department head, so this was 2010, 2011, in 6 months, 180 days, we were at sea 155 days. So it's more than 85% of the time at sea. Yeah, it's a lot.
Okay. I just sorry to cut you off there. Just kind of wanted to get a frame of reference there for
So the submarines based in Guam do it a little bit differently because they're they don't necessarily have to transit as far to where they need to operate, just being in the Western Pacific. So they can generate readiness a little bit differently. So they don't go out for 6 months. They might go out for a shorter period and come back. It just depends on employment method. But so at the time, anyways, we'd gone back to sea, finished the shipyard period. This is like the summer of 2004, and had really done well. Went out, got certified to deploy. Went out, did our missions, the actual missions that when you sign up, you had hoped to do. Came back end of like Christmas time of 2004, and then our higher headquarters, which is based in Japan, Submarine Group 7, gave us an assignment to go on a quality of life port call in Brisbane, Australia. So we were like, this is dope. This is exactly why people join the Navy. Like, see really interesting places. And Brisbane is, Australia in general is amongst the most sought after of port calls in the Western Pacific. Just, hospitality, just natural beauty, like Brisbane's Gold Coast, just uniqueness of the location. And so we had to undertake a transit to get from Guam, our home port, to Brisbane, Australia, which is about, I think, close to 6,000 nautical miles. Might be a little bit less than that to go check I haven't done voyage planning in some time, but let's just call it that.
And Buddha Berries, who's from Brisbane, says thank you for pronouncing Brisbane correctly.
Sweet. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm on it. I work with a good number of Aussies, so they're going to kick my ass if I don't pronounce it correctly. So we had to undertake quite a lengthy voyage. The voyage plan for this is quite extensive, and voyage plan, I mean like the navigational planning, like the risk mitigation, the review of the charts. Actually, at the time I came into the Navy, we were on paper charts largely. We were not doing electronic navigation.
Oh, that's an interesting thing to mention. I mean, if you see them in the movies, like where they roll out the big map of that's actually a thing until very, very recently.
That's right. Yeah. So so throughout my time coming into the Navy, and then all the way up until I became a department head. So not only department head, so chief engineer on a sub. That at that time we went smoke free, and then we went chart free. If you
chart free.
Yeah. So we were fully electronic navigation around that time.
Mofo says, can you say what you did? Or are you still under any sort of not talking about it thing? What you did on the sub?
Oh, personally, what I did, yeah, certainly. Yeah, we can pause on the San Francisco story. I can talk about that. Okay. So first job, it's like all the officers do some nuclear job or in the engineering department, being nuclear trained as their first assignment. And they'll do that for at least a year. So I was the chemistry and radiological controls assistant on my first boat. So that meant basically management of the enlisted mechanics, engineering laboratory technicians who sampled reactor plant water chemistry, steam plant chemistry, work on contaminated or potentially contaminated systems. So all the sort of rigorous controls that are associated with that, plus personnel radiation exposure. So we all wear dosimetry to monitor how much dose we get.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's, we're very tightly controlled. We design with, human performance factors and protection of life in mind. So very well shielded reactor spaces and very tight control of work on systems that may potentially contain radioactivity. So those are the guys that I had, and then finished that time as the communications officer on that first sub. Was sort of my last job. Then second assignment as a principal department head, I was the chief engineer. We call it the Eng. So the entirety of the engineering department is about 60 or so personnel, so half the ship, 5 different divisions, 4 nuclear, 1 non-nuclear. So we have some non-nuclear mechanics who basically are responsible for the ship's emergency diesel generator, atmospheric control equipment, all the auxiliary systems, and sort of the 4 non-engineering, non-engine room spaces. So yeah, those are the 2 jobs that I had.
Okay, so you got through Christmas 2004.
Yeah, I was up to Christmas 2004. We were going to get underway to go to Brisbane, Australia. So this is quite a long transit, and so we were all very, excited about the prospects of going for a Liberty call. We had delivered, had done a very successful mission. We're kind of on top of the world in many senses. We had really been a Cinderella story of a boat that turned around from being, having not the best reputation to having a really sterling reputation. And so that's kind of painting a picture of where we are. And then maybe if you want to roll into the video, then I can provide some more commentary.
All right, let's do that. Let me bring that up, and we'll just talk as much as we need to. It's only 11 minutes long, so we got plenty of time to kill with talking. Let's see. And this is very, very old. It's like YouTube potato cam. We're pulling a stellar 240? Yeah, 240p on this thing, man. Yeah, we're pulling some stellar quality here. So it's not me, it's actually the video. Sorry, let's go through this and just tell me to shut up and pause and just talk, and we'll work with it there.
Under the sea.
A head-on collision at 40 miles per hour is by any standard a bad accident. But a head-on collision in a submarine 525 feet deep in the middle of the Pacific Ocean is a disaster. That's exactly what happened to the USS San Francisco when it struck an undersea mountain in one of the worst accidents in modern naval history.
We had the Connecticut just fairly recently.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the Kursk here on the show.
Oh, you have?
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, that one, of course, that wasn't us, but we talked about the Kursk, and that sufficiently terrified people. And that was actually the first time I got the idea to talk to you. So like, hey,
yeah, yeah, your question. I think you were going to ask.
Oh, there was other submarine accidents. I know there was one more that I even talked about. I can't remember what it was.
So
the one that's by the wreckage of the Titanic.
Yeah, so U.S., if you talk about U.S., so there's been 2 losses of nuclear submarines in the history of the force. USS Thresher in 1963 was the first, and she was lost during sea trials. And then USS Scorpion was the second, and you're talking about Titanic, which was Bob Ballard was a commander in the Navy Reserves and oceanographer. And so his principal mission, as I understand it, was actually to find the wreck of the Scorpion. And then he was allowed extra time on the margins of that mission when he, undertook his theory to find the where he thought the Titanic might be. So those 2. Now, more recently, so you already talked about the Kursk, but non-U.S. So that the 2 recent sinkings, there was an Indonesian Type 209 diesel submarine, I think, that sank 2 or 3 years ago. And then there was another same type of submarine, Type 209, Argentinian, I think right around the time that I got back to Korea, 2017, 18. Unfortunately, mobilized global submarine rescue resources, but could not find her in time, unfortunately. And so the crew was lost.
The legendary Polish submarine that left their hatch open.
Right. Yeah. The off color jokes. Yeah. I think. Yeah.
So you're cruising what 38 knots?
So we were max speed. So I won't comment on the maximum speed, whether it's accurate or not. But let's just take for a moment. We call it flank speed. So as fast as a submarine could go.
He said what? He said 40 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour. I guess it'd be 40 miles an hour. I think he said. So, So you're just. What were you doing at? I mean, it was just a regular normal day. Do you remember what you were doing at that point in time, or just for curiosity's sake?
Yeah. So this was the meal hour. So I had finished eating and was in the head, so the loo or the bathroom, taking care of business, which is kind of an odd place to be, or maybe not an odd place to be, but that's where I happened to be. Rather embarrassing as it was, that's where I landed.
I want to talk about that a little bit later.
Okay.
How does a submarine run into a mountain?
I guess that's the
Whose
question.
fault was it? The answers may surprise you. But first, you'll hear the crew of the San Francisco tell you how they survived 52 harrowing hours at sea. This is what a $1 billion fast attack nuclear submarine looks like. This is what the San Francisco looked like after the accident. Its entire bow shattered.
What goes through your mind when you see the wreckage here? I mean, anything at this point, has it been long enough, or does it still kind of bring up feelings?
Yeah, I mean, it's been almost 20 years, and it's still very palpable. And we didn't, submarines, when they're on the surface, you see 1/3, and the other 2/3 are not visible. So even when we returned to port after the grounding, finally made it back to Guam, the scale of the damage was not apparent until the submarine was put into dry dock, about weeks later, I think a couple weeks later. And then we were really the realization sank in. We were standing on the wing wall of the dry dock looking down and saying, man, we are really kind of here on borrowed time. And so certainly, and maybe that's a bit of a hyperbolic way of describing it, but yes, certainly we were close to having lost the ship, without a doubt.
Took a full frontal hit.
How close do you think he came to losing that sub?
I think we came pretty close.
Commander Kevin Mooney was the sub's captain on that day in January.
Now, you said he was your essentially your mentor.
Yeah, and so he was the commanding officer of the boat. Yeah.
All right.
I do accept full responsibility for.
Oh, let's talk about that. I mean, this is one of the unfortunate things when anybody that's a captain or the person in charge of anything, and I get it all the time in my profession, when somebody does something or something goes wrong, it's the poor guy in the captain's chair that just goes, my ship, my fault. So, and I get that all the time from people. It's like, why am I the one that has to be criminally charged because some dumbass OS opened the wrong pump and pumped some bilge water into the ocean? Why isn't he the one going? But the answer is because I'm the captain and the buck stops with me.
Yeah, I think when you distill it down to its foundational elements, though, what is the full scope of the captain of any vessel's responsibility? And in the Navy, and as a admiralty lawyer, sets the standards for the ship's training programs, qualifies all the officers to be standing, the watches that they're standing. So it's fairly far reaching. And if there's any sort of, I think, less than adequate sort of enforcement of standards and or risk mitigations put in place, whether that's supervision, training, you name it, that is ultimately the captain's responsibility, and is quite clearly enumerated in the U.S. Navy regulations what the duties and responsibilities of the captain of the United States warship does. And so Kevin absolutely, who fully understood that before he took command and in command and following the accident. So I think it's very easy to cast stones exterior to the ship, but this culture of ownership, and I think it's not unique to the submarine service, but it's certainly an ethos that we embrace. Unfortunate as the accident was, I think we through our suffering, we exposed force-wide knowledge gaps across, it was not localized to USS San Francisco. And I think that's the important yet sad lesson that we learned in blood. And so I think that maybe I'm not completely answering your question, but I think, yes, are there, failures exterior to the ship? Certainly. But ultimately, the variables that we could control within our power, we could have potentially avoided running aground. And I think that's kind of, how it ultimately falls on the shoulders of the captain. And it wasn't just the captain that was held to account. I think it's the most visible of people, and sort of the captain is God, and you going back to Royal Navy era of history. But, the sea is a very unforgiving place. And so it's the captain's duty and responsibility in a lot of ways to ensure the safety of crew, safety of ship. And so I think that's not lost on anybody.
Yeah.
For the grounding of San Francisco, I expected the Navy to hold me accountable for this horrible accident, and they did.
Mooney was a rising star in the submarine force, handpicked to skipper the San Francisco on its peacetime mission of sneaking around the Pacific and spying on other countries and their navies. And in the 13 months since he'd taken command, he'd won accolades for his leadership. Then, 4 months ago, he and his crew were sent on a high-speed run from their home port on the Pacific island of Guam south to Australia for a port visit. They were passing through the Caroline Islands at a depth of 525 feet when 7,000 tons of steel with 137 souls on board came to a crashing halt.
The noise was deafening initially.
Deafening like a
explosion.
Mooney was eating lunch in the wardroom and was thrown across the table. What was your first thought?
My first thought was that I was going to die.
And all of a sudden, you find yourself slammed into something, and the whole world's shaking.
Senior Chief Danny Hager was in the sub's control room and smashed into the instrument panel.
I guess this is what I'm saying. I wanted to go back to you being in the John at the time, being there in the head. I mean, it seemed just at a gut level that would probably be one of, if not the safest place to be, because there's not a lot of room to fly and bounce around in.
Absolutely right. Yeah. So it was fortunate. The folks who were either in the rack, so in their bunks, or in the head, came out comparatively, if not totally, unscathed. Fortunately, our corpsman, so the medic, the senior medic on board, we don't have a doctor, like a physician on board subs. He was also in the head. Had he not been, I'm not confident that we could have triaged the amount and scope of injuries that we did. We also benefited from one of the officers in the wardroom, another close friend of mine, was previously enlisted as a corpsman, so a Navy medic, and had combat casualty care training. And so he was just an absolutely crucial set of second hands and sort of clinical capability to our corpsman, the doc. And so had we not had, we were very, miraculously blessed to have these two individuals completely unharmed during the accident.
I mean, you're going along at, I guess we said 33, 38 knots or whatever it was, 40 miles an hour, he said, and you stop. There's no slowing down. You just stop. I mean, what was in your head? I mean, did you know that what had happened just by instinct, or
on an instinctual level? Yes. And so even at the point I was on the boat, I've been there for a little over a year. I was fully qualified, so had my fish or dolphins, which is another totally separate topic area. Qualified to be officer of the deck on the ship. You've done enough training drills, casualty drills, when things go wrong, that you are so hardwired psychologically to just respond or run to the source of the problem, that it doesn't, the higher order sort of paralysis that might happen in your brain otherwise, not knowing what to do in a situation, is totally overridden. So on an instinctual level, yes, I knew something had gone wrong. What we hit, was it another object, another vessel? But quickly like calculate the odds of another submarine being in that space is like, pretty small. And the violence of the collision, like we hit the bottom that we were not expecting to be there. The deceleration was something like minus 11 Gs because we went from flank speed to 0 or something slightly above 0. And you saw from the photographs, quite fortunately, the blow was a glancing blow. So the feature, the object that we hit on the sea floor was, not directly in front of us. So it was a complete sort of T-bone, but, just a side swipe, as it were. But it still completely stopped us in our tracks. And so you imagine the amount of kinetic energy of 7,000 tons propelled at its maximum speed and then completely stopping. People are not, there's very few of the watchstanders, so the people that are controlling the ship or monitoring its systems that are actually seat belted in. You could see in the video the 2 chairs there. That's the ship's control station.
That's these 2 chairs here.
Yeah, and so Danny, the senior chief, who is the diving officer of the watch, sits in between, and then the 2 helmsmen and planesmen are on the outboard sides of him and inboard side of him. They're all more or less seat belted in. Everybody else is freestanding, so they go flying into whatever it is.
And human bodies just aren't built to take that.
And there's just the submarine is, as you could tell, it's not really a padded environment. It's, fairly treacherous just from the nature of the systems that are in there.
Did you suffer any injuries?
No, not. Well, after the fact, yes, I had injured my back, as it turns out, but it didn't, really kind of uncover that until, post accident. And so you're kind of, again, fueled by adrenaline. So you don't really notice that, but I wasn't like incapacitated, so I was functional enough to go do what I needed to go do. So even people that were sort of in the head or confined spaces still suffered injuries. So you have imagine whiplash type, injuries, certainly prevalent.
Well, I was reading the Navy report on about the accident, people that were injured. The details sounded pretty horrific.
Most definitely, yeah. So I came out of the head where I was, and as soon as I came out, a friend of another officer was having lunch, came out, and he had shoved his fork basically through his cheek, and so he's like,
"Oh my God!"
Completely dazed. Like, what happened? And I was like, dude, we ran aground. I mean, when I'd run to your action station or your, we can either we'll go to battle stations, or if there's some emergency on the ship, pre-designated spots you go to. So first place I went is the commanding officer is the captain's stateroom. And so that's where you control what we call damage control central, where you basically direct actions to get the ship in a safe condition.
I guess that might be a good question to ask, because in the movies, when things like this happen, one of 2 things happen. Either everything goes completely dark and nothing happens, or everything goes red and hoses break and water starts spraying everywhere. What actually happened? What was going on inside?
I think this is really a testament to the robustness of the construction of the submarines, and all of us in that crew have some shipyard workers at Newport News in Virginia, where the boat was built, to thank for the quality of construction, and certainly walked away with confidence that we could sustain substantial battle damage and survive. The interior to the submarine, so just give a basic primer on construction, right? So you have the pressure hull, or the people tank, where the humans live and work and operate, right? So
I'm going to call it a people tank from now on.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's colloquially what we refer to it, but the pressure hull. So essentially that is what is impervious to sea pressure, and to provide for, living beings to work inside of it. Exterior to that is what is called the ballast tank area, or the main ballast tank areas. So there's ballast tanks forward and after the pressure hull provides shape. So the submarine's hydrodynamic, and also a free flood area. So submarines need to be operated on the surface of the water and underneath the water. So how do you make a submarine lighter than water? You put air into those ballast tanks and you can drive on the surface. And folks who have seen World War II movies, when they dive the submarine, they open the main ballast tank vents. Those vents allow that air that's partially trapped inside the ballast tanks to escape, because the water pressure floods it and pushes the air out. So now your submarine is heavier than water, sinks, and you can use the ship's propulsion to drive yourself to the depth that you want to operate at. A lot of other physics goes into that. Tanks internal to the ship to maintain the attitude of the vessel. More complicated topics that we don't need to bore the audience with, but ultimately that free flood area of the ballast tanks acted almost like a crumple zone, if you will, during the actual collision with the seamount. Consequently, the damage did not impact the pressure hull directly, and so there was no breach of the pressure hull. So you didn't have water coming in. You didn't have again, testament to the robustness of the system's construction. You didn't have pipes breaking loose and water, steam spraying everywhere. As a matter of fact, none of that happened.
Just in the movies.
Yeah. Well, I think the difference in construction between World War II submarines, which, very different than, a 7,000 ton nuclear submarine is quite evident. But yeah, so none of the drama in that sense. Most of the drama was in fact responding to people who were quite injured. And so that was in its own sense, totally attention occupying. And then the need to get the submarine back on the surface because we did not immediately have the ability to return to the surface so we could continue troubleshooting what happened.
So did it ever go completely pitch black, or are there always the generators operating, or did you lose power at all, or?
No. Yeah. So if the submarine is pitch black, you got a real problem on your hands. Real problem. No. So the systems are designed in such a way that there's redundancy of electrical power. So even if the reactor were to scram or shut down, that you would have backup electrical power provided by the battery. You would get yourself close enough to the surface to start the emergency diesel generator if you needed to. But for us, the reactor was fully operational, even despite, taking the shock that we did from running into an undersea mountain at the speed that we did. So we were able to recover propulsion, though it did take some time in order for us to do that. No loss of power. So it's, again, just quite an amazing piece of technology and its ability to be resilient in such a catastrophic situation.
Let's clear a couple of the chats here and then get back into the video thing. Gigi says stepdad was on a sub for 35 years. Is there really a tradition when crossing the equator?
Totally. Yeah. Shellback. Jeff, are you familiar with shellback tradition?
No.
Being an admiralty lawyer and you don't know what a shellback is. No. Seems suspicious.
Suspicious.
Yeah. Sus, to use the terminology, the vernacular of the kids these days. So shellback. So anytime you cross the equator at sea, and this is not unique to the Navy, this is, nautical tradition writ large. A polywog is a mariner who has never crossed the equator at sea. Shellback is somebody who has, and there's a variety of traditions of shellback ceremonies that the Navy undertakes. Personally, I am sadly not a shellback. Came close on a couple occasions, and mission requirements caused us to divert about at 1 degree north latitude away from the equator.
Oh, so you never sailed south of the equator?
No. I've done the Golden Dragon, Order of the Golden Dragon, which is crossing the date line at sea numerous times. And there's a lot of different ones. Blue Nose, if you cross the Arctic Circle, Emerald Shellback, if you cross at the Greenwich Meridian and the equator.
So basically, everybody wants a participation trophy of something.
Everybody gets a trophy.
Then there's got to be one for like somebody that's never done anything to get.
No, in fact, those people are ostracized until they actually properly complete nautical traditions. Yeah.
And Pin King 554 says, like to see the sun after being under the sea?
No, absolutely. Yeah.
What was your longest undersea deployment?
So like I said, that last deployment that I did was 6 months, 155 days at sea. Obviously not continuous. You'll make quality of life port calls or pull in to get parts and restock your stores. I think in that deployment, we did a 70-day mission. So that's hatch closed until hatch open back on the surface again. So that was about the longest. Yeah.
And I Shoot Rope said lots of submariner families on the Big Island.
Presumably Hawaii. Yeah.
And JKD Buck says, who gets more radiation, you or a frequent flyer on Delta? I'm serious.
Frequent flyer on Delta by far. I would say probably in my lifetime of working on submarines, less than a single full body CT of dose.
Oh wow.
So yeah.
And BS Simon says best sub movie Down Periscope with Kelsey Grammer. What's your
Ooh.
I gotta tell people watching military movies with Josh, you get one of two reactions. You either get the which is kind of like watching law movies with me, or like when we watched the new Top Gun flick together, he's just sitting there going, "This is so fucking cool." And I was commenting on the fanboy. Well, I remember I was commenting on how cool the CGI was in the New Deal, and you're like, "No, dude, that's real." But they had a budget for Navy fuel on this thing, and you're like, "No, they were actually doing those aerial maneuvers in the new Top Gun movie."
Most definitely.
So, what is what's your favorite sub movie? Because I just assume you've seen them all.
I don't know that I've seen them all. Going back like Run Silent, Run Deep, which is really like OG submarine movies and really captures like what an amazing era in history of the submarine as an instrument of war. But I would say Das Boot. Das Boot impacted me on a number of levels.
Max von, it was not Max von. Like Jürgen Prochnow was in it, right?
Yes, and Wolfgang Peterson. Yeah. He pioneered like his techniques for filming on water that he used later in, I think, Cruel Sea with George Clooney. I think, or Perfect Storm rather with George Clooney. Yeah, thanks. So the first DVD I ever had to flip over to watch because it was so long, dating myself a little bit. But I think the way the story was told, it was based on a book. I'd read. Actually had previously read Carl Dernitz's memoir. And if anybody is fan of submarine history, Carl Dernitz was the Kriegsmarine, so the Nazi Germany's head of their submarine force. And so German U-boats played such an instrumental role in both world wars. And so this having read Dernitz's memoirs and how he thought strategically about using the submarine as an instrument of war, and then the true human story that unfolded in Das Boot, and just the danger and peril that they suffered, and the kind of I won't give away how the movie ends, but
they lose the war is how it ends.
In glamorous. I'm talking about the crew of this submarine in particular, and so it's really kind of amazing. Now I'm hearing that there's going to be a remake of The Hunt for Red October.
Oh, good. There's a remake of Das Boot. I'm like, no, it's not.
Yeah, I don't think you could remake Das Boot and kind of keep it at the level that it is. It stands alone.
What's the worst submariner movie? The worst submarine movie out there. The one that you'd rather stab your eyes out than watch again.
Oh, what was this Gerard Butler one? Hunter Killer. Yeah.
It just sounds bad.
So there's a retired submarine commander. He commanded the USS Santa Fe. He does really excellent YouTube video commentary. I can't remember his first name for the life of me, but he does breakdowns of submarine movies, and as a former submarine commanding officer, he does a really excellent job, and he's got a great sense of humor about it, and kind of says, no, here's what's realistic, here's what's not. So if anybody's interested, you can point them to his channel, or maybe you can do like a video breakdown with him.
Oh, that'd be fun. But again, Tracy Fagan asks, can a submariner suffer from decompression sickness?
Generally, no. So the interior of the submarine, the people tank, as it were, is kept at atmospheric or as close to atmospheric pressure. Obviously, you have 100 plus people in there breathing, so it reduces the pressure as you breathe down the atmosphere. But then our atmospheric control equipment is used to control, quantity of oxygen, quantity of carbon dioxide, and sort of other minor elements of the atmosphere. So it's just like being on land. And then the only time that would come into play is if there was a submarine disaster or accident, much like the Kursk, where the pressure hull would be partially flooded. And so when you partially flood that space, you compress gas. And so those partial pressures of those gas become an issue. And then decompression sickness could become a concern. The other scenario, plausible scenario, is submarine escape. So this would imagine the sub has suffered some accident. It's resting on the bottom, but it's shallow enough for the crew to attempt to escape using, we have two kind of floodable, or it depends on the submarine, but escape hatches, as it were. We call them escape trunks. So you can flood them with water and then close one hatch, obviously interior to the pressure hull, and open the other that's open to the sea. But we have specialized equipment called SEIE suits, SEIE suits, or Mark 5 or Mark 6 suits that allow you to not suffer from the bends if you attempt to escape at, a relevant depth. Yeah.
Sounds unpleasant though.
It's
I guess that's the last ditch thing. Yeah.
It is. It's all of us go through the training to use those suits when we're in our submarine sort of initial training pipeline, and then periodically, like my first submarine, we actually were upgraded to the newer style of escape suit. And so it's the unfortunate part is submarine, 80% of the world's oceans, the bathymetry is so deep that it's beyond the crush depth of the sub. So even if you were to suffer an accident, you wouldn't be resting on the bottom intact. So it's a very small amount of the world's oceans where it's shallow enough that if the submarine was resting on the bottom, where you could actually escape, and submarine would still be somewhat intact.
All right. Well, you got to tell a story here, and I'll be back in about 30 seconds here. Your stories. What's it like to eat in a wardroom, bougie?
Right.
Give me 30 seconds. I'll be right back.
Yeah.
I'm back. The wine got to me, and I tripped over a dog on the way back.
No. Hopefully, was it Yoda or Dalgi?
Dalgi thought it was playtime. It was just me running down the hall time. No. Okay, so I was going to use that to segue back in, but we had this. Is there a participation trophy for collecting all the participation trophies? It's like
great question that I don't have the answer to. I guess bragging rights would be the only thing I could say. I've never met somebody. Maybe
it's like a video game, 100% cheap, 100% completion trophy.
Yeah. There's some salty folks out there, some Master Chiefs probably.
And Jeff Moser says, "Please tell me you've heard Bismarck by Sabaton."
I can't say that I have. Is that presumably this is a book about the battleship Bismarck in the Second World War? I'm going to guess. I don't know.
Sabaton Bismarck. Let's find out. Oh, it appears to be some sort of death metal-y music.
That was going to be my second guess.
Yeah. Okay. Of which Josh knows a surprising amount.
Oh, thanks to our group of friends in Busan.
All right, let's segue back into our story here. So, okay. And there's something I hadn't thought about until you mentioned that because I knew it was at mealtime just from watching this video, but I just didn't bother to think that people would be holding things like knives and forks when this happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God. And All right, let's hit play here and continue.
Okay.
And immediately, I knew that we had hit something, and it was going to be bad.
Let me pull. How about if I pull up the video here? That would probably help, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Boomer. That's me. All right, I was having fun watching it, of course. All right, let's let them in on it too, shall we?
Just bodies everywhere.
Petty Officer Brian Barnes was standing in the lunch line and was thrown to the deck.
Broken glass, stepping on plates.
Do you, I guess these are all people that you knew, and are you still in contact with any of them?
Oh yeah, Brian. I saw. Brian's now an officer working for the Navy, and I think I saw him in the last 2 years. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Your shipmates moaning because they're in pain, yelling.
We had a lot of people thrown, up 20, 25 feet. Those were the guys that were injured the worst because, there's not very many soft things on a submarine.
Those still able began to take stock of the damage. Flooding is what every member of the crew dreaded most. At 525 feet deep, the water pressure is 16 times what it is at the surface. If there were any serious leaks in the inner hull, water would come rushing in and doom the ship within minutes.
The enemy is out there and it's seawater and it's trying to get in.
The crew of the San Francisco performed what's called an emergency blow, pumping air into the sub's ballast tanks to float it to the surface.
Now that's what we saw at the beginning with the with the submarine looking like it was breaching out of the water, right?
Right, the classic Hunt for Red October. Captain scared the Americans out of the water moment.
Okay, it was probably the Russian captain's Scottish accent that did it. Confused them out of the water.
That's right.
All eyes turned to Hager, who was monitoring the depth gauge.
I told him 525 feet, 0 acceleration, and I'm waiting. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I don't know how long it was. 525 feet, 0 acceleration, and it was just absolute silence and control because they were waiting for me to report that we were accelerating upwards.
And all you've got to say is 525.
525 feet, no acceleration.
What they didn't know at the time was most of their front ballast tanks were destroyed.
So the forward tanks were ruptured, and that air you were trying to pump into them was just going out into the ocean.
Just going out into the ocean.
Finally, air filled the rear tanks, which slowly began pulling the sub up.
You could feel the pregnant pause, and then almost the relief when I said 500 feet acceleration upwards.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. So I had gone to the captain's stateroom. That's sort of the emergency action stations. And then the captain came in and immediately, so Kevin ordered me to relieve the officer of the deck who had basically caved his face in on one of the computer screens or mounts in the control room. So, the person responsible for driving the ship was incapacitated. So I had to go out and relieve him. There's a normal process to watch relief, which is quite formal and disciplined, and you're checking the chart and the ship's position. Well, I'm like, looking like the chart is covered in blood because the quartermaster had also, cut his head. And as Danny said, the decks is kind of like a slaughterhouse. The decks are covered in blood. You come up there, just because so many people had hit themselves on sharp objects in the control room. So I'm like, well, we certainly know what our position is now because we found the bottom, and so then it's more a matter of getting the ship in a safe condition and understanding top to bottom, forward to aft. Do we have hull integrity? Is there flooding? What's the state of the reactor in the engineering spaces? What's the functionality of the emergency main ballast tank flow, which Danny is talking about here? And so all those things you kind of go through your pre-planned responses. But for this, there's no pre-written response to a grounding because this is not a normal expected circumstance. You can run through all those sort of scenarios, but you have to adapt and improvise your existing response plans to whatever catastrophe might arise.
How long did it take to get this up to the surface?
It took a few minutes.
Must have been about the longest few minutes of everybody's life.
It certainly was.
Getting the San Francisco to the surface was just the beginning.
the crew had to get that ship home. An injured crew, a beaten crew.
A terrified crew.
Yes, I think the crew was terrified. There was blood all over the decks.
98 of the 137 crew members had been injured, about 20 of them seriously. And
God, that is a phenomenal number.
Yeah, more than 3/4 of the crew.
And so it's not an exaggeration just to say when you said it looked like a slaughterhouse. I mean, there were.
Yeah, so lacerations, compound fractures in some cases, a lot of broken bones. And unfortunately, our one sailor who died, Petty Officer Ashley, skull fracture, and so it was serious. I mean, this situation was quite serious.
Enough that they could no longer man their watch stations. Petty Officer Joey Ashley was the worst off with a massive head injury.
Basically, he'd flown about 20, 25 feet and struck a pump head first, and he was in serious critical condition.
Mooney radioed for help, but the San Francisco was hundreds of miles from home, and there were no ships nearby. Its bow was crushed, its propeller bobbing in and out of the water, and the crew wasn't sure they could keep it from going down. As the hours passed, the crew struggled to put the submarine back in some kind of working order, while at the same time caring for the injured, especially Petty Officer Ashley, who was given an emergency tracheotomy to keep him breathing.
Everyone.
That's probably not in your corpsman's handbook of things that he expects to be. It's not on his bingo card, as the youth say these days.
Yes, believe it or not, but as I mentioned earlier, no physician, but they're called independent duty corpsmen on submarines. They are trained to a high standard of care, and so to up to and including appendectomy. Although in peacetime, the risk of conducting an appendectomy at sea versus transiting to someplace where you can get the crew member off. In this case, Doc was more than capable of doing what he needed to do, and he had the training.
God, he wakes up just expecting a normal day, and then he's poking a hole in somebody's throat a couple of hours later. I mean, but I guess that's what you're trained to do. It's
right. There's no sort of higher level cognition. It's you're responding as you need to.
Now things are going to look a little bit weird here because just to throw off the copyright people, I've now flipped the video horizontally, so all of the writing from here on out is now going to be backwards to throw off the copyright people.
Gotcha.
Kind of switched off with Ashley. They kind of stayed with him 24/7, around the clock, just holding his hand, taking care of him.
When word came that a rescue helicopter was finally en route, Ashley, who was strapped onto a stretcher in the bowels of the submarine, had to be moved through a labyrinth of tight passageways
that's crazy.
and up a narrow ladder to an exit hatch 25 feet above the main deck.
We were cutting off railings and
video share. I'm not seeing the video.
Intercourse. Let's. All right, we're gonna go back so you can see the inside of the ship here. Sorry, the boat. Why is it called a boat and not a ship for submarines? I've been yelled at repeatedly for that.
Yes, submarines are boats. They're not ships. It goes back to John Holland in the first submarine that the U.S. Navy employed, and it just built at a place called Electric Boat in Connecticut for a long time. It's just the vernacular that we use.
All right. Just the answer is just because it is. All right, everybody. The video's showing. Chill the F out. God. All right. Let's now watch. I mean, just the logistics of this are horrific. Knowing that there's someone who is in this serious of condition and having to take them through these hallways and up the ladders.
Tracheotomy to keep him breathing.
Everyone kind of switched off with Ashley. They kind of stayed with him 24/7, around the clock, just holding his hand, taking care of him.
When word came that a rescue helicopter was finally en route, Ashley, who was strapped onto a stretcher in the bowels of the submarine, had to be moved through a labyrinth of tight passageways and up a narrow ladder to an exit hatch 25 feet above the main deck.
We were cutting off railings and just doing anything we possibly could to ease the passage of that stretcher from where he was down in the crew's mess up to the area right below the bridge hatch.
This is video of the helicopter hovering over the San Francisco.
The water was washing over the top of the submarine.
And with the wave movement and the submarine moving, it was really dangerous.
So this is the actual rescue footage here.
Yeah, so that video was taken from the Coast Guard cutter that was dispatched. And so the helicopter pilots from this particular squadron, I happened to meet a couple of them afterwards. In general, it is a very difficult and dangerous evolution to transfer people to and from a submarine via a helicopter. To do it in these sea states and with our submarine in sort of an abnormal condition of ballast and trim on the surface, even more exceptional that they were able to do what they did.
It's amazing.
Until we were unable to get him in his stretcher through the bridge hatch.
So when the stretcher comes up like that,
right,
it's hitting the hatch and you can't get it past the hatch.
Couldn't squeeze it through.
Ashley clung to life for more than 24 hours, but the failed attempt to airlift him off the sub had literally been his last gasp.
When they brought him back down from that was when they lost him. It's pretty sad.
Yeah, real sad. One of your best sailors.
One of the best on board.
The crew had no choice but to press on. In a sub once capable of doing 40 miles an hour underwater, limped home on the surface at only 10.
And how long did it take to get her back?
52 hours from when we grounded to when we moored in Guam.
So now the San Francisco sits in dry dock here on the island of Guam. You can't see the worst of the damage anymore because a steel shield has been placed over the bow to make it seaworthy enough to sail to the States for permanent repairs. It will probably cost $100 million and take 2 years to put the San Francisco back in service.
A lot of cash.
So how could this accident have happened?
Dive!
For all their sophistication, nuclear-powered submarines run virtually blind to what's in front of them, relying mostly on their charts to navigate safely. They could use sonar to detect an obstacle, but its distinctive ping would give the sub's location away and violate the submariner's rule, run silent, run deep. The Navy's investigation blamed Mooney for using poor judgment in his navigation of the San Francisco. It went on to say he failed to appreciate potential hazards, went too fast, and most importantly, failed to review his charts adequately. He was relieved of his command and given a career-ending letter of reprimand.
The real punishment for me is that I have to carry the consequences of this grounding with me for the rest of my life, particularly the death of Petty Officer Ashley.
There's now a video tribute to Ashley at the Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C.
I'm going to flip this back around. It's kind of weird at this point. So let me do this. There we go.
I think his parents, Dan and Vicky, would blame Mooney for their son's death. But they have forgiven him his mistakes and believe some of the responsibility for what happened goes much higher in the Navy.
I want him to stand up and take responsibility, just like Commander Mooney and his crew. It would be nice to hear him stand up and say, yeah, Mr. Ashley, we screwed up too.
The Navy investigation didn't exactly admit to a screw-up, but it did find that an omission on one of its charts directly contributed to the grounding.
This is the chart the San Francisco was using when it ran into the mountain. It's one in a series of bottom contour charts, which the Navy considers the most complete and accurate for underwater navigation. It's not available to the public, so we can't show it to you in detail. But I'm looking at it, and I can see the course Mooney followed and the exact spot where the collision occurred. And there is no sign of anything resembling an undersea mountain. They gave you a bum chart. The Navy gave you a bum chart.
Right. It's regrettable.
There were other charts on board, including this one, that clearly show a navigation hazard near where the San Francisco grounded. And the Navy says Mooney and his team were required to look at all the charts, not to rely on the accuracy of just the one.
My biggest mistake, or the area where I fell short the most, I think it was I did not have a healthy skepticism on the accuracy of the charts. Had I appreciated that the charts really are not that accurate, then I would have navigated my ship more prudently.
It turns out Mooney wasn't the only one who trusted the faulty chart. So did the submarine headquarters, which laid out the basic route the sub was to follow from Guam to Australia, a route which pointed it straight at the mountain, a route which another report said did not follow an optimal track.
Did you follow the track that you were given?
Yes.
And that's the track that ran you smack into that undersea mountain?
Yes.
And that's your fault?
Yes.
Because?
The safe navigation of a submarine is the responsibility of the commanding officer.
It's what the Navy calls the essence of command. The buck stops with the captain of the ship.
The standard that the submarine force holds me and every other person to are high because they have to be. We can't afford to have another San Francisco.
That's a heavy burden to bear, that burden of command.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it wasn't on a chart. That's the essence of the accident.
So I think, just to put it more accurately, there were charts that depicted a navigational hazard proximate to where we grounded. Subsequent survey, so the Navy did survey the area afterwards and charted the feature in question. What Kevin was talking about, and what the host there of 60 Minutes also, the charts we were using, the limited distribution or the classified charts, bottom contour charts, we took on faith, or as an article of faith, let's say, that they were more accurate than other charts, when in fact there was serious knowledge gaps on, if you're familiar with nautical charts, there's something called a sounding source diagram that's in the upper right-hand corner of the chart. Mm-hmm. Electronic navigation, a little bit different with ECDIS-N and sort of the more advanced features of those charting tools. But in the paper chart world, that depicts like where the surveys are that underlie the bathymetric data, or like how deep the bottom is, the soundings that are on a given chart. Like, as a junior officer going through the qualification process, I can tell you, I didn't really have a good, robust understanding of that. But I could certainly tell you as we went through the grounding, the corrective actions following that, the training that we went through, and one of the reasons a lot of the officers in particular stayed was to ensure that those same lessons were not learned in blood. And so we were uber competent navigators in the sense of reading charts, understanding chart one. So like the NOAA, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, that publishes the hydrographer's office for the U.S. Navy and the U.S. generally. Chart one, it's like the key. It's like a book that tells you, like, I didn't know what chart one was. That's a foundational knowledge gap as a mariner, to not know what that was. And like, but that tells, like, what is discolored water reported, which is what the feature that we grounded on, shown on the 5-digit chart, the unclassified chart that we didn't use for voyage planning. Hey, what does that mean? Oh, like maybe we should slow down when we're near this, add more supervision, take more frequent soundings, operate a shallower depth. Those are sort of mitigating measures. That's what Kevin is talking about, alluding to. Those are the specifics, let's say, of how, we could have potentially avoided the grounding.
But it sounds like one of those things where it's not something you would think about doing because there's never been a need to do it. It's one of those hindsight being 20/20 things where we could have done this, but realistically, you wouldn't have thought about doing that.
So you can never account for all possible varieties of scenarios when you're talking about the sea, and submarines in particular. You're operating in 3 dimensions. So how do you manage that risk? And this is an inherently risky profession, particularly on the navigational front, right? So we know more about the surface of Mars and the moon than we do about the ocean floor. And so, actions being taken nowadays even to more thoroughly chart it. But you need to have that appreciation, recognize the indicators that, hey, when I look at this chart, man, there are a lot of atolls here. Boy, this area, we have not, like, our crew has not transited through this area before. Maybe we should raise some more questions. Are there time pressures on us completing the voyage plan because higher headquarters maybe didn't deliver us the moving haven or the track that we're talking about to go from Guam to Australia, to allow us to, in a thorough way, prep the voyage plan as far in advance as we can to take a look at what those risks might be. And so you really need to account for all those sorts of competing pressures and prioritize, right? You are navigating a nuclear powered 7,000 ton warship at high speed through the ocean. What are the things that need to be done? And so you cannot, if you wrote a procedure for everything, you remove the human element and the unique ability of people to problem solve and apply theory and principle to actually avoiding problems like this.
Well, we've got you for about 10 more minutes. So there's a couple of questions I wanted to go through, and then
sure,
hear what you're up to now.
And we can always come back in the future too if we want to do a follow-up session.
Oh, hell yeah, of course. I would even be willing to bump it back an hour for you.
Thank you.
Next stream, I need stories that aren't tragic. Is this a tragedy? Is this a miracle, or is it a little bit of both?
I think both. Of course, the loss of Joe Ashley is tragic and it affects all of us to this day. I think the miraculous part is the survival of the crew, banding together, responding in the way we responded to recover the ship, get back home. The fact that we still are all in touch with each other. We hold reunions periodically. The 20th reunion will be coming up next January. Yeah, January of 2025. And so that bond is virtually impossible to sever. And so I think that in and of itself is a testament to the nature of submariners, submarining as a profession. Kind of who we are goes to the core of our ethos, and ensuring, that that others don't have to learn the hard lessons that we learned.
Well, I mean, it's literally an experience that only a handful of people on Earth have ever experienced.
Absolutely. Yep.
And presumably no one ever wants to. I mean, it could have been so much worse, but it could have been avoided, as you say, at the same time. But yeah. That raises a Swan Lake lady's question here. Remember, for 19 months. Thank you so much. She's a homie from just over the hill in Utah there. What kind of safety protocols have changed for transporting and evacuation of severely injured who are not capable of moving on their own?
Yeah, so we talked about the hatch, right? On the earlier class of LA class submarines didn't open vertically. So the Navy has processes for evaluating in the wake of accidents like these. So we modified the design of the hatch to allow it to open further. We changed how fire extinguishers are mounted because some of those broke free and became, missile hazards. And so that changed. And then how you handle. So some of it was a case study on how to properly handle mass casualty situations on the submarine when you only have one trained medic. And so how do we train more of the crew in sort of combat casualty trauma care so that you have more hands and arms, to actually help the doc to respond to casualty situations, movement of an incapacitated patient. What do you wait for? Medical aid to come on the submarine? Do you get in a condition where helicopter can approach you? Unfortunately we're so remote, 400 miles from Guam, no helicopter could reach us, and so there are limitations in certain scenarios. But yes, we've done a lot of things to improve the safety, both in a kind of technological sense and then it's procedural and the human factors.
When we still know more about space than we do about a lot of places undersea. And Dave T. Get asked, how good are the undersea maps? I'd like to think that there's a lot of missing and inaccurate mapping going on.
Right. Yeah. 80% of the ocean floor as of yet unsurveyed. So the littoral area, the littoral seas, very surveyed. Where we were operating, when I looked at the sounding source diagram, Japanese merchant ships going from Japan to the Australia or the Caroline Islands in the 60s. Well, 1960s, what's your method of navigation? Loran. And even in some cases, you're probably not going to have Loran, right? So pre-GPS. So even where the lines are
out there, yeah.
Right. Some, believe it or not, Captain Cook lead line surveys.
Mm-hmm.
So the block will tell you like what is the source of the survey. It's like Japanese merchant ship, and it'll say 1773 Captain Cook voyage. And so,
oh my God,
to answer the question, not that well surveyed in the open ocean area still.
Well, and then just like this, the surface of the Earth, the seabed is always changing too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a dynamic environment. It's a living environment. So there's, tectonic movements and volcanism, and these things are changing. It's not a static thing.
When he also asked how the maps get made and who makes them and what parts of the ocean are mapped, I think you just answered that question, that part of his question as well, before he even had to bring it up.
Yeah, the hydrographer's office. Yeah, so the surveys will be done usually by NOAA, or depends on the country, but typically.
John Doe says there were other charts. It was not unforeseeable errors. Again, that's like, how many charts do you have to look at? Well, enough that you saw the one you should have looked at, I guess, is kind of the answer.
Right. Yeah. And then making it, the feature that we grounded on was not in the position that we grounded upon it. That's the other thing to keep in mind. It was about that discolored water was around 8 nautical miles from where we actually found it. But again, applying all those principles, as John is saying here, you can't rely on your superiors. No, right? Yeah, the burden of command, and then so not unforeseeable error. So you can do a more comprehensive review and voyage preparation process.
You can't rely on your superiors. No one cares about your safety than you. Harsh lesson for the whole Navy. And JKD Buck says, Joshy, that was awful. I hate that you had to go through this. And similar sentiment from Alex Kane. Thanks for your time, Josh. Which non-nuclear Navy would you least like to come up against?
Oh, that's a challenging question. I would say it would probably be one of our allies or partners. So big, highly proficient operators of diesel electric submarines in the world. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Forces. Great example. Highly proficient operators. They don't have nuclear powered submarines, but ultra quiet, ultra proficient. I would not like to go toe to toe with them, but that's why I'm happy that they're the United States ally and not on the opposing side.
And you retired from the Navy just about a little less than about 8 months ago, I guess.
Yeah, not even. So I left Korea June. And then
that's right. Yeah,
you retired in November.
Yeah, November. Yeah. I think you left Korea about 8 months ago. That's when you retired in my eyes, Josh. That's when you retired for me. And you didn't take much time off. What are you doing now? What's post-retirement life for you?
Indeed, yeah. I threw my plan to take a year off out the window. And took an opportunity. I did take a couple months off, but took an opportunity working for a defense technology startup called Anduril. It's if you're familiar with the Lord of the Rings, the sword, the Flame of the West. If you're not a J.R.R. Tolkien fan, it's spelled Anduril. So we are based in California, doing some interesting work, trying to disrupt the way the Department of Defense acquires its military technology, and it's a really, really fascinating space to work in.
And JK, did you leave any bottles of booze to Larax when you left Korea? Yes, he did.
I think I did. Yeah, I think there was a couple of things left in the locker there at Casa Habano.
You left me some of your gin.
That's right.
And I just smoked the last of the Bolivars yesterday.
Nice. I'm glad you got some good mileage out of that.
So yes, he did. That's what's great about being me, is I'm everyone's just trash can when they leave. Is like, here, I can't take these bottles, can't take these cigars you want. I'm like, well, of course. So, and we didn't have time to touch on it much, but you're also world-class sailor. Are you still planning on the big thing you were planning on before?
Yes. So that's the Clipper Around the World race. So not.
This is what I want to have you
yeah,
to come back on
yeah,
and talk about.
yeah.
Briefly,
So
what
not,
are you doing?
So I sail just personally. I have a Catalina, 32-foot Catalina that I sail around San Diego locally, and then looking at joining the Clipper Around the World race, which is kind of a pro-am global competition sailing over the course of a year from the UK all the way back to the UK. It's a 25,000 nautical mile voyage split up into different legs that are all races, 70-foot ocean going yachts, crews of 20 to 24 people. So in about, I would say, 4 years time is the plan to go join that race. Maybe not for the full circumnavigation, but some discrete legs that I'm interested in doing.
So we definitely want to have you come back if you're willing to come back and put up with my chat. They're pretty darn good chat. They're a pretty good group of people.
Yeah, I appreciated the professionalism. People were not going.
Well, you weren't reading too closely then. Yes, you weren't reading too closely.
I'll go back and watch this on YouTube after the fact and to see the barbs that were getting lobbed. But no, happy to come back anytime. The nautical topics are awesome. The Francis Scott Key Bridge incident, totally interesting one. My hometown, kind of in that area. So
that's right.
I grew up there and so driven over that bridge many, many, many times. So it's sad to see the accident. Appreciated the commentary, and obviously the story is still developing. Any topics maritime, really glad to come on. If you want to talk more about subs and kind of, I think we only sort of scratched the surface a little bit there. Totally happy to do it.
Well, that's great because Island says we need Josh back for a funny /cigar stream. Well, we definitely haven't come back for a fun chill stream one of these days and talk about fun stuff.
Yeah, this was rather serious, wasn't it?
It was, and we're trying to kind of get a little more levity. And Josh is also an amazing historian, not just naval and military historian, but an actual just like student of history. So, but definitely, what I'm planning on doing a turtle boat story before too, sometime in the near future, and I know that's a particular area of interest for you.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
We should have a Korean Admiral Lee Soon-shin and a turtle boat week one of these times.
Yeah, down for it, totally.
And Lynn wraps this. Oh yeah. Oh no, geez, you're too kind. I just sit here and make a nuisance of myself. But Lynn gifted 5 Legal Vices memberships. If you got one of those memberships, make sure you give Lynn a super special thanks. And I've taken all of Josh's time plus 3 minutes. So we do need to wrap it up. And thanks everybody for watching this, mods. Thank you for keeping the shenanigans to a relative. And first impressions are important. He can see the real chat next time. But my Josh, Bud, it's good to talk to you again. It's been a while since we've done a face-to-face.
It has. Yeah, I'm glad we could catch up this way. It's really awesome. I'm definitely looking forward to coming back to Korea at some point and hanging out in person.
Anything on the horizon?
I think close. So. Yeah, come close. Probably within the year, I would say I'll be back. So I'll keep you posted on the travels for sure. And then,
all right.
Yeah, we'll get together.
And we'll continue to chat and send ridiculous memes and watch stuff back and forth.
That's right.
as we always do. But thanks, Josh, for being. I know you got to get on with your day, and I need to go to sleep. So.
Okay. Chat. It's a
thanks
late one.
Everybody. Super special thanks to Josh. We're going to send you on over to Andrew Branca and his stream right now. We'll let you raid him. Josh, hang tight real quick for 1 second after we shut this down here. Guys, we'll see you tomorrow. We're going to pick up with What the Hails. We're going to be doing John Cook's Ohio hearing. We'll be reviewing that tomorrow and all the shenanigans that entails. Don't miss that. We'll see y'all later. Take care. Go tell Andrew Branca hi from me, and we'll see you then. See you tomorrow. Bye, guys.